Thank you. The next item of business is a debate on motion 23537 in the name of Alec Rowley on BiFab. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? I call on Alec Rowley to speak to and move the motion. Mr Rowley, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. In moving this motion today for the Scottish Labour Party, I want to make clear that Scotland can and Scotland should be a key player in Europe and indeed the world when it comes to the green energy revolution over the coming decades. We should be setting up the opportunities for high-skill, high-wage jobs. Our young people should be guaranteed a bright future through high-quality education, skills and training that gives them a secure and prosperous future in a Scotland that leads the way when it comes to tackling the greatest threat to their future, climate change. But for that to happen, it needs politicians and governments with political will, determination and a willingness to stand up for Scotland. Sadly, on all fronts, this SNP government is failing. And nowhere is that failure more exposed than in the sorry tale of BiFab. The SNP in this Parliament have made a career out of blaming anyone and everyone to avoid taking responsibility for their failures. And true to form, they are now blaming the Canadians who formed a partnership with them to rescue the Scottish Yards. So let's look at the facts. In 2017, GV Diver, at the invitation of Scottish ministers, advised the Scottish Government during its financial intervention to save BiFab. This progressed into an acquisition discussion between the Scottish ministers and GV Driver over the course of several months. Now, the company have stated publicly that the final purchase discussions and agreements always envisaged that the Scottish Government would be the primary financer of the business as it recovered from the Beatrice project and pursued new contracts. So I would suggest that it is a red herring for the Cabinet Secretary to blame the company due to a lack of investment. It is equally a red herring to blame the company for the lack of a long-term business plan.
Oh, sorry. Cabinet Secretary.
Thank you for giving way. In relation to the proposals were set out in the pre-acquisition business plan, does he understand and appreciate that that business plan indicated that the shareholders, majority shareholders, would provide investment, would provide working capital and would provide assurances? Is he aware of the content of that business plan?
Alec Rowley.
I'm aware that in evidence yesterday to the Economic Committee, the Economy Committee, that the Chief Executive was very clear of the agreement that was made between the Scottish Government and the company. And it is equally, as I said, a red herring to blame the company for a lack of a long-term business plan. BiFab have stated that it was always GV Driver's intent to re-establish the business with a primary focus on UK domestic market renewable energy projects, and that this was openly discussed with Scottish ministers and set out in the long-term business plan. And that's the view that correlates with the decision of Scottish ministers to seek approval from the Finance and Constitution Committee back in November 2019 to provide a 100% guarantee for the NNG contract, including a 100% guarantee in support of a performance bond from RBS. The Economy Committee heard yesterday from the CEO of DF Barnes that had it not been for the COVID, work on the NNG contract would have been well underway by now. But due to the delay, the letter of intent was signed between CPAM and BiFab in mid-September to commence project activities. Then, to the shock of the workforce, the trade unions, the company, the government announced they were withdrawn from the guarantee. DF Barnes President Jason Fudge told the committee yesterday that the firm had been prepared to put up to 500 employees back to work on a contract for the turbine jackets for the NG offshore wind farm project, when it emerged ministers could no longer provide the necessary financial support. So the question is, what changed between the discussions and the approach to the Finance Committee back in late 2019 and 2020? The Cabinet Secretary says they got legal advice that the government would be in breach of state aid rules. The first point to be made is that we are out of Europe on the 31st of December, so the state aid would not apply. But to blame state aid seems convenient for the SNP, whilst governments across Europe seem to find a way of supporting their industries and their workforces. But what of this legal opinion? Where did it come from and what did it say? It seems a reasonable question to ask. We are asking the government to publish the legal advice. The GMB and Unite trade unions have sought and published their legal opinion. As partners in BiFab, they have asked the government to do likewise, but was told by the Cabinet Secretary that they would have to seek a judicial review in order to be able to get that information. This is not a good way or a good definition of partnership working with the trade unions in Scotland. BiFab and the unions have presented an option for working alongside CPAM in the Fife Yards and asked the government to jointly present this to CPAM and EDF, but this has not been taken up by the government. That option is still on the table and would secure jobs in Scotland. We cannot, presiding officer, sit back and allow the work of Scottish offshore renewables to go to countries in Asia where the price differentials is primarily driven by low-cost labour, state-led investment and subsidies, and behind the scenes, European state aid rules this government hides behind. To do so is to sell out Scotland to the lowest bidder. So, presiding officer, I move this motion today and say that the youth of today and the youth of tomorrow will need the jobs, and the only way to get those jobs is for the government to step up and find a solution, work with the trade unions and work with the company. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Rowley. I now call Fiona Hislop to speak to and move Amendment 23537.2. Cabinet Secretary, please.
I move the amendment in my name. I welcome the opportunity to contribute to this debate today on BiFab. I know this will be a worrying time for BiFab's workers, and we continue to do everything in our power to support them. The Scottish Government's support for BiFab has been significant. £37.4 million was converted to a 32.4% equity stake, which is the financial support the member referred to, and a loan facility of up to £15 million was provided. The Scottish Government has provided 100% of the working capital for this business. One of the main questions that has been asked of me is why the Scottish Government was able to support the company in late 2019, but not now. In answering that question, it's important to note that BiFab had a strong pipeline of work opportunities at the start of 2020, with the potential to secure both the LNG and Sea Green contracts. The combined delays to the LNG contract award as a result of the pandemic, SSE's decision to award the Sea Green contract to companies in China and the Middle East, compounded by JV's drivers' continued lack of financial support for the business, has greatly weakened BiFab's cash flow and balance sheet to the point where we can no longer lawfully support the company financially. And it's a wing and a prayer to think that somehow there'll be a state aid solution in January. We have no idea. And there will be a state aid solution. We don't know what that state aid rules will be. And you must understand that the Scotland Act specifically provides responsibilities for ministers that are not liable for other ministers in other places. Now, I have considered all legal options for... I want to develop my point. I have considered all legal options for continued financial support to BiFab by the Scottish Government. My conclusion that the Scottish Government can no longer continue to support the business currently is based on a range of facts, including the current position of the business, its trading forecasts, its prospects for future work, and the continued no-risk position of the majority shareholder. We've explored a range of alternatives, including state ownership, but have concluded that there is no legally compliant way for us to do so. We've also... Yes, I will.
Murdo Fraser.
I'm grateful to the Cabinet Secretary for giving way. BiFab have claimed that JV Driver offered on numerous occasions to transfer their shareholding in the company to the Scottish Government at zero cost. Is this true? And if so, why was that offer refused?
Cabinet Secretary.
So I've just made the point that we've looked at lots of different options, including state ownership. We discussed the transfer of shares, not only just to ourselves, but to third-party investment. But that also was not legally state aid compliant. JV Driver said it would provide us flexibility. It would provide us no flexibility in relation to the legal constraints. We've also explored the provision of financial support with the UK Government, and as the joint statement on the 24th of November made clear, the UK Government has considered that there is no legal or commercial basis for it to support BiFab at this time. And I recognise the interest in the legal position, have noted the calls for the relevant legal advice to be published, but as I've previously explained, under the terms of the Ministerial Code, and this is a position no, I can't give way, I've only got a few seconds left. It's not permissible for me to do so. This is a position that is actually shared by the Conservative UK Government, which the Conservative front bench may want to reflect on in terms of publication of legal advice. With Michael Gove, I agreed to form a joint UK and Scottish Government working group to ensure possible options are explored in relation to the supply chain. This is an important step. The UK policy landscape is one of the major barriers to strengthening our supply chain. The weaknesses in the UK Government's contract for difference mechanism work against Scotland, and the Scottish supply chains, meaning companies like BiFab, have limited chances of securing work. The contract for different auction needs to ensure that project bids are not secured purely on the price per megawatt, and the UK Government must consider the wider economy and a response to the climate change emergency. These are all points that have been made by industry to the Economy Committee of this Parliament. So, Presiding Officer, we have left no stone unturned in our search for a solution to the challenges faced by the business, and we are committed to working with all parties to deliver the best outcome for Scotland.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. And please note that if you take an intervention, while I've got some time in hand, I will give you the time back, which I did to yourself and I also did to Alec Rowley. I now call Liz Smith to speak to move amendment 23537.1. Ms Smith, please.
Thank you. Can I welcome this debate brought to the Chamber by Labour, given just how important a topic it is, not just because of the issues that it raises about BiFab, but because of all the related matters regarding wider policy objectives and government engagement. And that's true not just in the context of the future of the economy in Fife, but also in terms of COP26 and the opportunity that affords for Scotland to be leading the way when it comes to climate change and the green investment and job creation which must accompany it. When Benny Higgins presented his report on economic recovery early in the year, he was absolutely adamant that Scotland, in its determination to deliver the triple targets of emissions reduction, the development of natural capital and green job creation, we needed an investment-led recovery with good access to both capital and digital technologies. And at the same time, both he and Lord Smith were very clear indeed about the need for much stronger relationships between industry and government, and for strengthened relationships between the Scottish and UK governments, and that demand is surely very much at the centre of this debate. Because if we are to ensure that the green jobs are not just about wind turbines, but about hydrogen technologies, about electric buses, carbon capture, etc., then we have to have government working together. And BiFab has unquestionably raised other issues, because it's quite clear that until the joint communique of the 24th of November, when the Joint Working Party was established, government has been failing the BiFab workforce. Let's be very clear that jobs at BiFab have been long under threat, and it was deeply regrettable when both governments concluded that nothing more could be done to support the company's finances. And whilst we know that BiFab has undoubtedly encountered issues of its own, especially with regard to the outstanding payments and the resulting legal action taken by the German company EEW, the Scottish Government has lost £52.4 million in this debacle. And I would.
Cabinet Secretary.
As of the terms of the Labour Party motion, will she condemn the UK government for not providing financial support for the business?
Liz Smith.
No, I will not, because it is a matter of a joint working, just as I've said in the earlier part of my speech. Scottish Renewables Cabinet Secretary told the Scottish Parliament's Economy, Energy and Fair Work Committee, and I quote, "It is unfortunately the case that investments which could have been made over decades that would have seen the UK being able to compete with European supply chain companies on things like fabrication, they just simply weren't made," pointing out that in previous years Scotland had been very competitive against countries like Belgium and Spain. And we know too that the SNP invested £3 million of taxpayers' money in a South Korean company which now only has one full-time member of staff in a factory at Machrihanish and no orders. And we know too, and I'm sure my colleague Murdo Fraser will say much more about this in his response, we know too that there is 2.2 billion of the 8.2 billion boost for the Scottish budget, which Kate Forbes is not prepared to say how she will make that part of the Scottish investment. And it's not as though the Scottish Government has been meeting its own climate change targets as measured by several independent bodies such as the Energy Saving Trust, nor has it been meeting pledges on energy savings and new buildings, renewable heat targets. And they also abandoned their not-for-profit energy company. Consultants were paid thousands of pounds. No, I won't if you don't mind. If I wish to correct the record, Mr Wheelhouse, I will. Consultants were paid thousands of pounds for a business case which was due in January 2019, then delayed to April, and in the last programme for government it was not mentioned at all, and I think I'm correct in saying that. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, the BiFab situation is deeply damaging and Labour are right to bring this debate to the Chamber. It raises significant concerns about green policy consistency and coherence, just as was raised by several witnesses at both the Economy and Environment Committee. May I move the amendment in my own name, which seeks to ensure that future policy commitments on renewables are part of a coherent industrial strategy for the post-COVID era.
Thank you very much, Ms Smith. And I now call Mark Ruskell to open for the Greens. Mr Ruskell, please.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. 15 years ago, I visited the yards at Mathil, and at the time they were largely empty of workers. But in the old office block, there were dozens of pictures of the huge offshore oil and gas structures that were built at the yards. The workers smiling, proud of their skills and the great contribution to our nation that they made. And at the time, I think many of us saw a bright future. Yes, the yards needed considerable investment, but on the horizon was the promise of a commercially viable offshore renewable sector with work for generations to come. That bright future has now arrived, but it's arrived in the yards of Asia and the Middle East. It hasn't arrived at Mathil, Mount Island or Arnish. The reality is that markets have failed consistently to deliver the full jobs potential from Scottish renewables. From CS Wind to BiFab, governments have been unable or unwilling to assemble a domestic supply chain with the right investment, in the right places, at the right times. And if this government is serious about a Green New Deal, then it will have to put public ownership of energy at the heart of its industrial strategy and deliver on it. Courting private investors is clearly a lottery, and DF Barnes appears to have been caught out by the way projects are procured in the UK, expecting more certainty and conditionality in a market that they clearly didn't fully understand. I don't know who's to blame for this. Was it the board at DF Barnes? Was it the Scottish Government? Or was it both? But the reality is that once again, the workers at the yards have been massively let down. And they're in a situation where the company is now unable to realise the opportunities that are right in front of them. Now, I don't doubt the Scottish Government's desire to see BiFab flourish, but it's not acceptable for this government to continually throw up its hands as a minority shareholder and say it can't do anything when it has had clear opportunities in the past to take a majority stake in the company and take control in the boardroom. Undoubtedly, the lack of conditionality within the contracts for different process continues to be a problem for BiFab and the rest of the UK renewable supply chain, and that the UK government has clearly failed to create a jobs guarantee that would be in the public interest. The CFD scheme is ultimately self-defeating because if the aim is to ensure lowest cost energy to the consumer, that has to be built on a strong Scottish supply chain that is specialised in delivering the next generation of solutions for Scottish waters, such as floating wind. All the ingredients are there at BiFab, with its long history of offshore fabrication to deliver in the challenging environment of the North Sea. But alongside CFD reform, the jobs guarantee must also be delivered through Crown State Scotland leases. Supply chain statements from companies looking to bid for the next round of wind farms in Scottish waters are being produced right now. And these must be meaningful so BiFab and other companies can use them as strong, bankable foundations for their business plans. They need to demonstrate that there's a clear future line of work for industry based in Scotland, whether that be in fabrication, blade manufacture, or operation and maintenance. There must be a clear picture of what that supply chain will look like, where it will be located, and this must align with the supply chain plans that will be required in the future under CFDs. The presiding officer, the frustration of communities in Fife and the Western Isles is palpable, and it's not the first time that they've been let down, but it must be the last. And the promise of a Green New Deal can't just be about words. It has to put food on the table of the workers, and it needs to do that fast.
Thank you very much, Mr Ruskell. I now call on Willie Rennie to open the Liberal Democrats. Mr Rennie, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. 500 workers were on the verge of filling up the BiFab yards to work on the NNG wind farm off the Fife coast. This would have provided a real-life connection between the domestic electricity users and the massive turbines that they are ultimately paying for. It would have tied the economic well-being of industrial communities across Scotland with our efforts to combat climate change. It would have signalled to other companies and countries across the world that Scotland was matching the high rhetoric of Alex Salmond, Nicola Sturgeon and even Keith Brown with delivery. Buying in everyone into the battle on climate change is essential if we are to succeed in that battle. But today, this has come to nothing. There will be 54 turbines for the NNG wind farm. But this government can't even get organised to build 8 of them. At no point did the Scottish Government tell the Parliament that BiFab was on the edge of collapse. Where was the debate about the additional support that was supposedly required? For 2 years, this government has boasted that it has saved BiFab, but the truth is this: a couple of hundred temporary jobs were created in the last couple of years. If the reports are accurate that the government may lose over £52 million it invested in BiFab, it will mean each job has cost us £262,000, £250,000 for every job, every temporary job that has been created. If we paid everyone £50,000 a year to each of those workers to sit at home and do nothing for the next 5 years, we'd still have money left over. It is an astonishing waste of money. But what is even more wasteful is that it's a failed opportunity to bring economic opportunities for hundreds of people across Scotland. And the government answer? Yet another working group and a commitment to leave no stone unturned. If the government is expert at this. It's expert at creating working groups, reviews and studies. If setting up working groups and turning over stones created jobs, we'd have full employment in this country by now. Who knew that when Alex Salmond was talking about the Saudi Arabia of renewables, what he meant was that Scotland was going to be turned into an industrial desert? I feel sorry for Fiona Hislop for being handed this portfolio. Keith Brown, who's not even here today to answer for himself, Nicola Sturgeon and Alex Salmond should be in this seat explaining why this has all gone wrong. They are the architects of this situation. They are responsible for this. And I find it staggering that the government is pointing the finger at DF Barnes when it was the Scottish Government that recommended that company to this Parliament. They brought them here. They are responsible for that company being in charge. So what should happen now? The Government should publish the legal advice on state aid without any further delay. The Union have done that. The Government should follow. The Government should immediately contact EDF and Saipem to ensure that those jackets, those 8 jackets, can still be built here if we can get our act together. That we should have an industrial plan by January to secure those jobs and even more. The clock is ticking. From the Fife coast, I can see the work on the NNG already started. The S7000 Saipem's semi-submersible crane vessel is installing the casings for piles and preparing the seabed. The question is, can the government get working too, or will it create another working group?
Thank you. Now the open debate. Speeches are 4 minutes with a little time in hand for interventions, which you can make up. I call Claire Baker to follow by Annabel Ewing, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. It is just over 3 years since the workforce of BiFab marched down the Royal Mile to the Scottish Parliament to fight for their jobs and for their community. The company was on the brink of collapse and jobs were in the balance. Through no fault of their own, this was a hard-working, skilled and respected workforce. The company was facing administration and the workers faced redundancy. I recognise the role the Scottish Government played in that and retrieving that situation and enabling that contract to be fulfilled. They did this by investing public money into the company and bringing in DF Barnes with the investor JV Driver. But we are facing a situation where the company is again on the brink of collapse and the Scottish Government appear to be falling short. The Cabinet Secretary said yesterday she had exhausted and examined all options. Last Tuesday, the Scottish and UK Government issued a joint statement ruling out financial support for BiFab, effectively bringing to an end the prospect of up to 500 jobs from the NNG contract. The statement also said the working group will look at options for the future of the sites where BiFab currently operates, which suggests to me that they think BiFab are finished. The Scottish Government and the UK Government must take joint responsibility for cutting off this lifeline for the company. The Scottish Government's defence of state aid rules is challenged by Lord Davidson, who said the decision looks to be irrational and could be open to judicial review. At the very least, it would appear preemptive, as we are weeks away from leaving the EU. There are questions to be answered over what has taken place over the past 3 years, and other members have spoken about this. Where are the... Yes.
Cabinet Secretary.
Would she recognise that the view of Neil Davison QC itself said it was based on partial information? And would she like to tell me what terms of state aid rules will apply in January?
Claire Baker.
Perhaps it's partial because the Scottish Government haven't published what it is they're taking the advice from. There are questions to be answered over what's happened over the last 3 years. What were the terms of the deal with DF Barnes? They challenged the Scottish Government's argument that it's failed to invest, saying that JV Driver had repeatedly offered shares to the Government at no cost, and it was understood that the Scottish Government would be the primary financiers. If the Scottish Government say different, will they publish the details of the deal that was struck? Will the Scottish Government be honest about the meeting on the 19th of September and the advice that they gave to DF Barnes? And why have the Scottish Government stopped working closely with the trade unions? I cannot understand why they were sidelined and their members had to read about the decision to pull the plug on critical funding in the newspapers. It is clear that there needs to be a reform of contract for difference. UK companies are undercut by overseas yards delivering it for a cheaper price, which leads us to the ludicrous situation where the majority of the NNG contract is manufactured in Indonesia, then shipped thousands of miles to the Fife coast. But let's not use this as a way to deflect from government failure in this case. The NNG contract for difference is a more advantageous deal than those that have been done more recently, and the 8 jackets on offer for BiFab are slim pickings from which is a significant contract. But my key concern, and the concern of people in Fife, is how do we rescue the NNG contract? There are those that will argue JV Driver should get out the way and let someone else take over. I want clarity over whether this is a realistic option that would secure the NNG contract. In discussion yesterday, the Cabinet Secretary said it would have to be a company involved in the tendering process with CPAM. Is there an option here for providing that guarantee? The NNG contract is vital for building the reputation of the company, demonstrating they can deliver. Without that, there is little to invest in. The short to medium term pipeline is virtually non-existent. BiFab are based in Methil and Burnt Island in Fife. We cannot underestimate the significance of the job for this area. The Levenmouth area is within the 5% most deprived areas in the whole of Scotland, an area which has suffered from industrial decline and isolation. The good news of the reopening of the Levenmouth rail link is a boost, but there is a desperate need of good employment and apprenticeship opportunities in the area, and the NNG contract can deliver that. The BiFab yard at Burnt Island is also important to the prosperity of the town. 3 years ago, the First Minister said the BiFab workers had every reason to be optimistic about the future. Presiding Officer, I ask what optimism can the communities of Methil and Burnt Island have today? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms Speaker. I now call Annabel Ewing to be followed by Maurice Golden. Ms Ewing, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I welcome the opportunity to speak in this short debate on BiFab today. And can I say at the outset that as the MSP for Cowdenbeath constituency, I stand full square behind the BiFab workers who have demonstrated time and again that their skills are indeed second to none. And I would also wish to recognise the important role that their trade unions have played. And it is clear that the BiFab workforce are angry. And I quite understand their anger, for they have been let down by the neglectful disinterest of the majority shareholder and parent company JV Driver. Indeed, JV Driver has completely failed to step up to the plate by refusing to provide either working capital or guarantees, and that notwithstanding, as we have heard this afternoon from the Cabinet Secretary, the commitment in the pre-acquisition business plan for it to do just that. What I would say to JV Driver and the board is that it is now time to step up or to step out. For if JV Driver will not act, then they need to make way for someone who can back up their words with real investment. Of course, the other key problem at this time is the UK Government's contract for difference auction rules, which in fact represent a significant barrier to supporting the renewables domestic supply chain in Scotland. Indeed, the UK Government CFD rules facilitate a race to the bottom, further to the complete abject failure on the part of the UK Government to have built in any conditionality into the process. This key problem has long been identified by the Scottish Government and by others, and calls for its reform have so far been ignored by the UK Government. And this pivotal issue concerning the CFD regime demonstrates quite clearly, Presiding Officer, the key elephant in the room. And that, of course, is that the power over energy policy lies not with this Parliament, but with Westminster. And so, notwithstanding the fact that the Scottish Government has been unstinting in its efforts to support BiFab over the years, backed up by over £51 million of investment, something that the Liberals don't seem very keen on to support Scottish workers, it has to be noted that the Scottish Government has nonetheless had to operate with one hand tied behind its back. Of course, the Scottish Government did seek a wholesale
just a minute,
transfer.
Ms Ewing, please sit down a moment.
Sorry.
In a very quiet chamber, barracking from either side means I can't hear the speech. And I've heard most of them so far clearly, and I'd like to hear Ms Ewing's as well, and anybody else's. Ms Ewing.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Of course, the Scottish Government did seek a wholesale transfer of energy policy to the Scottish Parliament during the 2014 Smith Commission process, but sadly, it must be recalled in this respect that no proposals at all for the comprehensive transfer of energy policy competences were put forward by the Labour Party to the Smith Commission. And for the sake of completeness, none were put forward either by the Lib Dems or the Tories. So, Presiding Officer, some may conclude that it is just a bit rich for the Labour Party today that has not supported the transfer of energy policy to this Parliament, and so therefore does not support the Scottish Parliament having the powers necessary to do the job, to point a finger when it has been quite content over the last 6 years for the Scottish Government to operate with one hand tied behind its back. Indeed, it is a perennial curiosity of the Labour Party's position that they would prefer that energy policy in Scotland was driven by the imperatives of Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg et al, rather than by our Scottish Parliament elected by the people of Scotland. Presiding Officer, in conclusion, it is self-evident that in energy-rich Scotland there can be a bright future for the renewable sector in Fife and indeed across Scotland. And for the BiFab workers at this time, I know that the Scottish Government is continuing to explore all options open to it and is continuing to have discussions with, in particular, SIPEM. But what is also self-evident is that to maximise the potential of our renewable sector, we simply cannot afford to see our workers let down by a UK energy policy that does not work for Scotland and indeed demonstrably has worked against Scotland. At its heart, politics is about people and it is about dignity. But delivery can only be secured if there is the power to do so. Otherwise, it's just a lot of words. Thank you.
When I say I want to hear things, it's not just for a moment, it's for the rest of the debate, because you reverted to type, and that was annoying me. And I know we're going to hear you, Mr Golden, in delicious silence. I call Maurice Golden, followed by Claudia Beamish.
Deputy Presiding Officer, today's motion opens with a statement that every one of us should be fully committed to, that Scotland should lead the way in building a green economy. Central to that is a just transition. Rebuilding from this pandemic must level up the entire country, especially in sectors facing decline. North Sea oil and gas is a prime example. As fossil fuels use drops, the sector will need support to protect jobs and to transfer valuable skills to low-carbon industries, such as decommissioning and renewables. The UK Government has already committed to a North East transition deal, so it would be sensible for the Scottish Government to work with them to ensure the best chance of success. Happy to take an intervention.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you to Maurice Golden for taking an intervention. Would he recognise the Scottish Government has already committed £62 million to Energy Transition Fund in July as a prelude to the UK Government developing its North Sea transition deal, and actually we've already played our part in meeting the industry's asks?
Maurice Golden.
I welcome support from both of Scotland's governments. We'll come on to the failures of the Scottish Government shortly. But let's continue on a menu of working together, because that model has already been established with the announcement of a joint working group to look at the future of BiFab's site, as well as generally boosting the renewable supply chain in Scotland. This cooperative model must become the standard, because ultimately it offers the best chance for creating jobs and saving jobs. And of course, saving jobs is the immediate priority, even as we look at creating new low-carbon ones in the years ahead. The UK Government has launched a truly massive rescue effort. Nearly 1 million Scottish jobs have already been saved, and the UK Government's furlough scheme is now running until next year to ensure they stay protected. But any cooperative model requires both sides to play a role, so it is time for the SNP to step up and produce a coherent industrial strategy, one that sets out clearly how they will create those future green jobs and how old industries like oil and gas will be transitioned to a net zero future. The approach from the Scottish Government thus far has clearly not produced enough positive results. Alex Salmond promised 28,000 jobs would be created by 2020, but fewer than 2,000 have been created so far. This is despite Scotland seeing an unheralded expansion of renewables, and I believe 28,000 jobs have been created, just not in Scotland, as the SNP promised they would. It is the same pattern repeated over and over. Promises are made, SNP politicians smile for the cameras and then disavow responsibility when it falls apart. Just look at the £100 million Green Jobs Fund, a big announcement with zero detail. The not-for-profit energy company announced in 2017 hundreds of thousands splurged on consultants and now not even mentioned in the programme for government. Or the Green Ferries fiasco from the disgraced Derek Mackay. The result has been cost overruns climbing past £100 million and years of delay. And most recently, as I mentioned, there is BiFab, another sad example of how the lack of a serious industrial strategy risks jobs. The SNP's clumsy handling of the matter means workers face an uncertain future. The public looks set to lose over £52 million and our green recovery takes a needless blow. There is no shame in not having all the answers, but I would urge the SNP to try something different. Work with our UK Government partners to ensure Scotland builds back better. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Golden. I now call Claudia Beamish to be followed by David Torrance. Ms Beamish, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. We are confronted with a multitude of crises. from COVID-19, its effect on the economy and employment across the country, and the climate and nature emergencies. A conscientious and strategic government would be making substantial steps and investments to tackle these all in tandem. I must join with my Labour colleagues in condemning the Scottish Government's decision to withdraw the financial guarantee to BiFab and add to the calls for it to produce the legal advice to justify its claim that its hands are tied. Is the Cabinet Secretary and the Scottish Government hiding behind the ministerial code? Because this is really significant and important. Expert work has been done by the STUC and its member unions, particularly the GMB and Unite, to show options on the table for the Scottish Government to exercise a little creativity and be bold in the face of the risk that is faced by these workers on behalf of the people of Scotland. In opening for Scottish Labour, Alex Rowley outlined the developments clearly so far. When will this pattern of offshoring of jobs end? And when will our manufacturing base begin to flourish? Cabinet Secretary, will it be now? Will the Scottish Government urgently negotiate with EDF and SAIPEM to find a solution that ensures that the NNG contract for 8 wind turbine platforms, only 8 out of the large number that are going to be built, is carried out in these yards? Will the Scottish Government commit to a proper industrial strategy that establishes a publicly owned energy company that can create jobs from day one? This is urgently needed, not another working group, which the STUC aptly describe as the thinnest of gruel, and that's a quote. We will be out of Europe, sadly, only too soon, and in relation to state aid, it would be possible surely to think creatively and bravely, even if we remain aligned on this. And does the Cabinet Secretary agree that community and environmental externalities, including the carbon footprint of transportation of content, sometimes halfway across the world, need to be factored into the procurement processes? I'm mindful of a speech I made on BiFab in May 2019, in which I said that this was a test for the Scottish Government. Can anyone dispute that 18 months on, it has been a resounding failure? The absolute disconnect between warm words and tangible action from this government is deeply frustrating, and the Cabinet Secretary should be assured that this Chamber's stakeholders, affected workers and communities, and the broader public are taking notice in this climate emergency. Friends of the Earth state this situation shatters the foundations of a just transition, and it comes a year before Glasgow hosts the COP26 summit in December 2021, at which just transition is supposedly one of this government's main themes. Oh, along with people. At the Scottish Renewables Green Energy Awards last week, there was heartening work to be celebrated in the renewables sector, which aligns with the growth in energy generation. But low carbon jobs are down since 2014, would anybody believe, proving so clearly that Scottish workers and affected communities need much more intervention in order to realise the supply chain opportunities. BiFab, and in a different sector, Alexander Dennis, should be the proud signifiers of a bright future in green jobs, and it is painful that these companies and workers are struggling. I cannot emphasise enough that a just transition must be the ultimate driver. That counts for all sectors. The Just Transition Commission's lifespan is coming to a close, and the government is yet to respond to some of the interim recommendations. The Cabinet Secretary must surely commit to extending the Commission and putting it onto a statutory and long-term basis. Its work is certainly not done. In fact, it's hardly started. And as for the climate change plan update, this must be integral to connecting with a just transition obligation as well, and I hope the Scottish Government will commit to this today. But right now, surely the Scottish Government must think again for the sake of the BiFab company, its workers, and their families and communities, and rescue the NGG contract. Then we will have a symbol of the future that really will count for something. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Beamish. I call David Torrance, to be followed by Alexander Stewart. Mr Torrance, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. As a member of the Scottish Parliament for Kirkcaldy constituency, within which 2 of the BiFab yards are situated, I very much welcome this opportunity to speak in today's debate. The firm has been a major employer within the constituency. A significant contributor to the local economy in Fife has been the beating heart of Scotland's green reindustrialisation. One of my first engagements following my election in the Scottish Parliament in 2011 was visiting the BiFab yard in Meffel to meet the management team and the workforce following the completion of the wave energy company Aquamarine Power's next generation Oyster 800 hydroelectric wave energy converter. It was a fantastic piece of engineering and highlighted on a national stage the quality and skills of the workers we have in Fife. BiFab's apprenticeship training scheme ensured the continued provision of a highly skilled local workforce, provided training and skills to young people. Fife and the wider Scotland cannot afford to lose this workforce. They are a valuable resource and they are suffering because Scottish renewable sector companies are being rendered powerless as overseas yards are able to build at scale and with prices far lower than they can achieve. I wasn't surprised to read the content of Labour's motions with comments and options that fit the narrative and conveniently overlook the harsh realities of the situation. Let's all condemn and blame the Scottish Government for the problems being faced by BiFab, when the Scottish Government have actually fought tooth and nail to protect the future of the company. With no mention of the failure of majority shareholder JV Driver to make any investment or provision of working capital or assurances for the company. In order to save BiFab from closure in 2017 and support the delivery of SSE's Beatrice offshore wind project, the Scottish Government invested £37.4 million through equity and loan facilities and converted this into a 32.4% equity stake in BiFab. In addition, a loan facility of £15 million was also provided to support working capital. It was this finance that supported and ensured that the Beatrice offshore wind farm, Moray East pin piles and the first ENP contracts were completed, in turn creating over 1,000 jobs across the 3 yards at Arnish, Burnt Island and Meffel. Labour also fails to acknowledge in any way the problems highlighted in JV Driver's very own statement, and I quote, "A race to the bottom, contract for difference auction, process created an intense pricing pressure on BiFab's pursuit that no level of domestic investment could overcome, confirming that without a change in UK government policy, we are never going to win the contracts." Whilst it is obviously extremely disappointing that SEC were unable to award the Sea Green contract to BiFab, it was extremely telling that neither have they been able to award the contract to any UK or European supplier. BiFab's bid was competitive with all other UK and European bids, but UK government's damaging contract for difference rules work against Scotland and Scottish supply chains, meaning companies like BiFab have limited chances of securing work. The reality is BiFab was competitive with all European yards in its bid for SSE Sea Green fabrication contract, but ultimately the work went to yards in the Far East. With powers reserved to UK government, the Scottish Government has no ability to change the CFD rules. This is clearly a failure of past and present UK governments and illustrates the unacceptably high price that Scotland has forced to pay as part of UK. No thank you. JV Driver's lack of financial investment in the business and the zero risk position it has adopted as a shareholder is extremely disappointing. I strongly believe that if JV Driver are not willing to invest in BiFab to create jobs in the renewable sector, and more importantly, highly skilled local jobs that will benefit the local economy, then as a majority shareholder, the time has come for them to step aside and allow other interested parties to come in and invest in the company. In conclusion, Presiding Officer, BiFab and indeed Fife has shown itself to be a strong player in the offshore renewable energy technologies, with a workforce and expertise to be a major player in the global efforts of developing clean energy and reducing our carbon footprint. However, it is clear to see that energy potential in Fife and towns like it will only be realised in an independent Scotland, where we would have the powers to insist on the supply chain work as part of any subsidy regime. We are a country rich in expertise, technology and ambition. Scottish companies can no longer be left standing on the sidelines watching as contracts are awarded overseas.
Thank you. I now call on Alexander Stewart to be followed by Alistair Allen. Mr Stewart, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I have much pleasure in participating in today's debate by the Labour Party on BiFab and very much welcome the debate. We in the Scottish Conservatives recognise the need for more renewable energy to help cut emissions as part of a more balanced mix of energy sources. But this cannot come at the cost of thousands of jobs, and any transition on energy must be fair to the workers. And when we see to tackle climate change, it seems to me rather ironic to build many of these parts of renewable energy like an offshore wind farm halfway around the world and then transport it back to Fife, where a significant impact on the environment. Transition is important, but it's important also that we cut our emissions to ensure that we don't have that capacity. And when we have a company such as BiFab here in Scotland that has the capabilities and the capacity to build parts of wind turbines and supporting local jobs, it seems completely mad to commission them from elsewhere in the world and locate them just 10 miles off the Fife coast. As we have heard today and we've heard in the past, these contracts are the very survival of BiFab yards, and many associated jobs are at risk because of that, Deputy Presiding Officer. And we've heard that an injection of public money at present would breach state aid rules for BiFab. We've also been told that it's quoted that it's not viable due to the lack of contracts and coming down the pipeline. And we also know about the inability to ensure that there's an unwillingness to put money into it. The Scottish Government have claimed that if Scotland was independent, they could have saved BiFab. But in reality, the SNP objective of taking Scotland back into the EU would mean that they are constrained by state aid. So those rules would not help the benefit the yard or the workforce. I have seen during this saga the broad campaign which has been involved with the community groups, the workers, elected representatives and environmentalists who've all worked alongside trade union representatives, working together to put pressure on the company and governments, and that has fallen on deaf ears. It's a kick in the teeth to the local community that they have had to devastate this. And the Scottish Government have failed to ensure that many of the promises were kept. Back in 2010, the then First Minister claimed the offshore renewable industry could create 20,000 jobs in Scotland. And of course, that has not taken place. And we have seen, and we continue to see going forward. My colleague Liz Smith talked about the need to have an investment-led recovery, the need for green jobs, and the Scottish Government have ensured that they have failed BiFab. Maurice Golden talks about the information and the transition period that's needed to ensure that the sector has the support. That's what's needed, Deputy Presiding Officer, the support of the community, the support of the workforce, and the support of that sector. And the Scottish Government have failed time and time again to ensure that that reality has taken place. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, I very much welcome the debate that we've had today, but it's a disaster that it's had to take place under the situation and circumstances we find ourselves in. And the policy of renewable support has to be coherent, it has to be community-led, and it has to be achievable. And the Scottish Government have failed, as I said, on every aspect of that support for the company. Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer.
Thank you, Mr Stewart. I call Alistair Allen. You're the last speaker in the open debate.
Presiding Officer, the impact which the BiFab situation has had on the Arnish fabrication yard and on the wider community in Lewis, where I live, is only too obvious. The sense of disappointment is raw. As others have pointed out, there is no legal route for either the Scottish or UK governments to provide any further financial support to BiFab in the absence of a shareholder guarantee and investment from the majority shareholder, JV Driver. This all has, of course, an awful sense of déjà vu for my constituents, with promised inward investment and plentiful contracts, all heralding a bright future for Arnish, painfully followed by a lack of corporate investment. As the majority shareholders, it is ultimately the responsibility of JV Driver to provide that investment, and I understand they failed to provide very much detail on questions around that when they were before the Economy Committee yesterday. However, the UK Government has some questions to answer in all this too. For instance, we have heard that the bid for the Sea Green contract was competitive with all the other UK and European bids, and also included a significant Scottish supply chain component that would have helped drive Scotland's green recovery. Sadly, it was not to be, due to the built-in drive to the bottom that marks the UK contract for difference scheme. And as Claire Baker and others have indicated today, until the UK Government amends this scheme and allows for supply chain commitments to be a factor in the awarding of CFDs, rather than these being based solely on price, it will always be an uphill struggle for Scottish yards to compete on anything like fair terms. Now, I do believe that we need to be sure that all options are kept open, including the option of the yard in Arnish being used by other companies, a point made clearly by the Action for Arnish campaign. So it would be good if, in our summing up, the Cabinet Secretary were able to give any view on whether BiFab has fulfilled all of the lease requirements on the site at Arnish, and on whether the Government's mind remains open to the option of HIE potentially leasing the yard to someone else who intends to utilise it. A number of my constituents have suggested, for instance, that Arnish could be a hub for helping to construct the hydrogen infrastructure that could help decarbonise the transport sector in the islands. Such an Arnish-built hydrogen infrastructure could also help to provide some local grid stability that would avoid the present sorry situation where emergency funding was needed to keep local wind turbine-funded charities afloat when the SSE cable to the mainland recently broke. These may only be ideas, and the focus still has to be on the options that will bring work in the here and now. However, all of these and other imaginative options for Arnish do hold out the prospect of good skilled jobs in the islands, as well as the obvious link-ups with Lewis Castle College. Arnish has the potential to be a vital training hub for skilled workers. I urge the Scottish Government to engage with HIE and fully explore all those options to allow Arnish to become productive again. And I would also ask the Scottish Government to continue in its efforts to persuade the UK Government to embed meaningful supply chain commitments into the contract for difference process. Only that will allow yards like Arnish to be the fully functioning part of our green recovery that they certainly all deserve to be.
Thank you very much. Closing speeches. I call on Murdo Fraser to close for the Conservatives. Mr Fraser, please. Thank you,
Deputy Presiding Officer. I've only got a few minutes to wind up in this debate, so I want to spend a little time available to me just deconstructing some of the arguments we've heard from SNP speakers in their pretty shameless attempts to shift the blame for what has gone wrong here onto anyone else. Because as Alec Rowley said when he was opening this debate, this is a government who will take no responsibility for anything at all. And what we've heard is really an attempt to shift the blame in three different directions: to JV Driver, to the EU for its state aid rules, and to the UK Government in relation to contracts for difference. And I'd like to look at each of these in turn. I'd like to start with the involvement of JV Driver, because they seem to be the principal bogeyman put forward by the SNP benches, and the Cabinet Secretary expressed her concern at their lack of support. This led to a response from BiFab on the 27th of November, who said they were, and I quote, perplexed and disappointed by what the Scottish Government was saying, because according to them, JV Driver had repeatedly offered to transfer their shares to the Scottish Government at no cost. At no cost. And this puts into context the ludicrous comments we heard from Annabel Ewing demanding that JV Driver step up or ship out. Well, they've offered to ship out numerous times. The only person stopping them shipping out, Presiding Officer, is the Scottish Government. I'll give way of Annabel Ewing's brief.
Annabel Ewing.
I'm grateful to the member for giving way. Obviously, I presume that Mr Fraser isn't disputing the fact that they have failed to provide any working capital or guarantees, and perhaps he could take this opportunity to apologise for the impact of his Tory government in London's contract for difference regime, which has so mitigated against our domestic supply chain. Thank you.
Mr Fraser, I don't want two people on their feet at the same time, charming though it may appear. Mr Fraser.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'm sorry Annabel Ewing didn't take the opportunity to apologise for her ludicrous remarks earlier, when we've been told JV Driver offered to transfer their shares and the Scottish Government refused to take them on. It's not anybody's fault but the Scottish Government, and no wonder BiFab said that the claims that JV Driver had broken their promises were, in their words, inaccurate and untruthful. What a damning assessment of the Scottish Government. And then, Presiding Officer, we had the attack on EU state aid rules from the Scottish Government and the issue around legal advice. Now, we know there is legal opinion from Neil Davidson, QC, that's been taken by the trade unions on this, but as has been pointed out, we are leaving the EU in 29 days' time. Surely, if there was an issue with EU state aid, that may not apply in 29 days' time. We don't know. Surely we can show some ambition, Presiding Officer. Surely we can show some leadership, Presiding Officer. As the STUC said in their submission to this debate, other European countries manage it. Why can't this government manage it? It is so uniquely inept. And then, presiding officer, we heard about criticism of the UK contracts for difference from numerous SNP speakers. This must be their go-to argument for this particular debate. This system is a bid system. It is designed to reduce the cost of energy to the consumers. The same people complaining about this are the same people who week after week come to this chamber complaining about fuel poverty, complaining about the cost of energy, complaining the government's not doing enough to keep energy costs down. And here we have a system designed to reduce the cost, designed to make sure large energy companies are not charging too much. No time, thank you. To ensure large energy companies are not charging our constituents too much for their energy, and they decry it. But, presiding officer, you know what? Whatever the contracts for difference say, planning is under the control of this Scottish Government. Scottish ministers granted the planning consent for these wind farms through Marine Scotland. They could have installed contracts and conditions in the planning for local training and supply, and they failed to do so, presiding officer. This is no one's fault but their own. Presiding officer, this is a modern-day Scottish scandal. Workers in Fife and Lewis were promised they would benefit from jobs from a new generation of renewable energy projects. These jobs are going elsewhere, and that was entirely avoidable, presiding officer, if the Scottish Government had been prepared to step up and help, and it failed to do so, and we have been let down as a result. Now, what they need to do, presiding officer, is what the motion today says. They need to step up, sit down, let's see how they can work with the UK Government, see if there is a way forward. But, presiding officer, today this Parliament has to send a clear message to the SNP Government that they have failed the renewable energy sector, they have failed the workers in Fife and Lewis, and they have failed Scotland. And for that reason, we should support the motion in Alec Rowley's name.
Thank you. I call Fiona Hislop close to the Scottish Government. Cabinet Secretary, please.
The Scottish Government's position is clear. It has not been a lack of willingness to support BiFab. It is simply that we cannot legally provide further support at this time, and would not have been able to do so with state ownership if Murdo Fraser had listened to my answer to his first intervention. And he also shows his ignorance of state aid restrictions on planning as well. Arnish points were well made by Alistair Allen and issues to deal with the opportunities there. I don't have enough time to go into that, but he makes some very valid points, and I'll engage directly with him. We will work to ensure a positive future for the yards and workforce. We also remain committed to developing the strength of our renewable supply chain in Scotland, and I have emphasised to both EDF and SIPEM the priority I placed on seeing the delivery of the 8 jackets and the energy contract in Scotland. That was a point made to me by Alec Rowley. Can I say to him and also to Willie Rennie that I spoke on these points to EDF back in September. My officials have been in contact regularly since. I've also written to SIPEM on the 10th of November, reiterating the position already shared with them by my officials. Can I also make the point, and it refers to the motion that's put forward by Labour. BiFab is a contracting party with SIPEM, with whom the relevant contracts and management knowledge, as well as ability to make operational decisions, rests. The Scottish Government has in no way prevented BiFab's board from engaging directly with SIPEM. We are not aware of BiFab or JV Driver having progressed any such discussions with SIPEM. I think Mark Ruskell's points were well made. He talked about DF Barnes and JV Driver perhaps not appreciating and expecting more certainty in the market, and that there would be more conditionality. And that comes to the heart of the issue. As the Economy Committee heard last week from Scottish Renewables and EDF, the issue with contract for difference is that with contract for differences offered to those developers proposing the lowest price, it will be very difficult for developers to accept paying a premium to secure the economic and environmental benefits the industry wants to deliver. And if you look at some of the differences in the cost, the Beatrice received a strike price before the first auction of around £140 a megawatt hour. The cheapest project in the first project round was under £114, and then it went down to £57. Seagreen received a contract of only £41 per megawatt hour. That's a drive for low-cost tenders and the UK are not using the powers it has to impose the supply chain conditionalities that Mark Ruskell referred to. So, Presiding Officer, we will continue to press for radical changes to the contract for difference system. I know trade unions share the view that change is necessary. And as Annabel Ewing set out, opposition members in the chamber want the jobs but not the powers to secure the jobs. The difference with our amendment and their position is we want the powers in Scotland to deliver the jobs and not be constrained by the ill-thought-out race to the bottom in global cheap labour costs that comes with Labour and Conservative continuing to support the Westminster Government's control over powers for contract for differences policy. There are challenges, there are issues, and I want to finish on this point. We want jobs for that workforce. We are committed. I've set through a number of areas where we've looked at all the options possible. We are in a difficult position, but we under no illusion. This Scottish Government wants the jobs in Scotland, and we want the jobs in Fife, and we want the jobs in Irish.
Thank you. And I call Rhoda Grant to close for Labour. Ms Grant, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We should all be committed to green jobs and a just transition, but the Scottish Government have failed to deliver either of them. BiFab is the stark example of that. With 3 yards, Methil, Burnt Island and Arnish, Scotland should have been leading the way with a just transition. It's just not happened. We've got conflicting information from the Scottish Government and DF Barnes. The Scottish Government says that they are not an active shareholder, but provided a guarantee which was required to bring home the contract for National. It is unclear why, at the 11th hour, this guarantee was revoked. If the business plan was so out of date, surely it should have been updated before now. If the guarantee was subject to work being won, then surely it should have remained in place to secure the contract. The Scottish Government say JV Driver should have invested. They say they have. We are now involved in a blame game, and meanwhile, these contracts are going elsewhere. Alec Rowley said that the Scottish Government hide behind state aid rules, although less than a month we will have left the EU and will be no longer subject to them. Meanwhile, Spanish yards, which have benefited from some of these contracts, continue in state ownership and enjoy state intervention. On one hand, they say they cannot invest unless the market economy investor would do the same. It begs the question then why they did invest in the first place if there were market investors queuing to invest. Yet now, when we know that other organisations want access to these yards because the Scottish Government have told us so, they withdraw the guarantee. It makes no sense whatsoever. Claire Baker pointed out that Lord Davidson disputes the Scottish Government view, and we need honesty and transparency on this. Will they publish the legal advice, or are they doing, as Claudia Beamish said, hiding behind the ministerial code to hide that advice? Can I just take a moment to highlight the plight at Arnish in my own region? It's a smaller yard, but it can employ proportionately more of the local population in Lewis and is therefore an economic driver. The yard is in good order, well equipped due to the investment from the public purse. It has facilities that are sought after, yet it lies empty. The terms of the lease require that the care and maintenance of the machinery, but it appears that this has not happened, and therefore DF Barnes and the Scottish Government as a shareholder are in breach of their lease agreement. Because of this, the lease must be terminated and the infrastructure protected, and the yard made available to other organisations who could use the facility. I understand there is interest in that yard that could bring jobs and wealth to our local economy. Liz Smith and Mark Ruskell pointed out the similar position in Machrihanish, again in my region, where the CS wind yard lies empty. The turbines being sourced from abroad, again a yard with public investment, but failing to bring jobs to our communities. Same is true in Burnt Island and Methil. If the Scottish Government and DF Barons are a dead hand, then they must transfer them to organisations that will bring green jobs and work to our Scottish yards. What is also clear from the debate is there's something wrong with the way that these contracts are let. And in Indonesia, a welder gets paid £2.80 an hour. Yet our leases and taxpayers' money goes to companies that use these terms to line their shareholders' pockets. No licence, no planning permission, no lease should be let without the obligation to provide local content and the obligation that these be built with the same people getting the same rate, fair rate for the job, and whose safety and conditions are equivalent to that they would expect in this country from our own workforce. This is not illegal. All bidders are subject to the same rules, and it promotes our values. Presiding Officer, Scottish Government choose to blame everyone else, demand more powers, but they are not using the powers they have to hand to make a difference. This is not acceptable. The Scottish Government need to come clean. They need to share the knowledge and legal advice in order to work with this Parliament, the trade unions, and to secure the future of our yards.
Thank you very much, Ms Grant. That concludes the debate on BiFab. We'll shortly move on to the next item of business.